Alright friends, welcome to today's video. This time I wanted to talk to you about one of the most commonly asked questions I get from new Tarkov players, and that's, how do you tell a PMC from a scav? And subsequently, how do you tell a player scav from an AI scav? That question is really important. It's a very good question, because knowing who you are fighting can kind of inform what risks you can take and how many resources you need to use, and what strategies you need to do. Like if you see kind of skinny guy like this yelling at you in the middle of the road, do you need to throw the 3 grenades you have in your pocket? Probably not, because that's probably an AI scav. Whereas if you see this turbo thick McThunder chunk, then maybe you would probably hope you had 5 grenades instead, you know? So, yeah, it's a good question, and it's a question we're going to answer today. One of the first things I'm going to point out is that there are very few differences between a PMC and a player scav. It's mostly just a difference in gear and level of aggression. Usually because a player scav has no gear and they didn't have to pay for what they do have, if they see someone who's geared up like this, usually even though it's not likely to go in their favor, they'll take the fight so they can try and get the gear and make tons of profit on their run. So I find it more important to distinguish between whether or not it's an AI or a player rather than a PMC versus a scav. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit first, and we'll get into the differences between scav and PMC after that. The first thing that you can do to figure out what you're fighting is know where you're going to run into the AI enemies. Because if you know where you're going to run into the AI enemies, and you run into someone who's not near any of those spots, then you know that that's a player. So this is a map of customs from Map Genie with all of the scav spawns marked. So you know these are AI scav spawns, not player scav spawns. So you know if you're in any of these areas, like this is the bus station, this is dorms. Over here we have new gas, and then like old gas is like right there. So if you're running through all of these areas and you see a person, there's a chance for them to be an AI. What that also means is that if you're over here in these fields between the sniper roadblock and the dorms, or if you're up here, by the train tracks north of the power station and all that in the woods, and you see somebody, you know that those aren't AIs. They're players. Now, looking at the map and, memorizing where the pins and stuff are is one thing, but more effectively and more importantly, the more you play and the more time you spend on the maps, finding and running into AI scavs and everything, the easier time you'll have remembering where they are. Because you'll have all these experiences and stories, and oh, dude, this AI popped around this corner, scared the heck out of me. That kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that helps you remember where they are and get used to seeing them in those areas. And then that way, if you're not running in any of those areas, again, you'll know that you're running into a player. The next thing we're going to talk about is movement. This is one of the other easiest ways to tell an AI from a player. Generally, AIs move in straight lines. They patrol specific paths, and when they get to the end of the path, they stand really still in the open. As far as I can remember, I've not ever really seen a scav look up and down. So if they do, it's like when they're looking at someone to shoot at them. But 99% of the time, their guns are going to be straight level with the ground, or like parallel with the ground. And generally when they're running, for the most part, they don't swivel. They don't do anything. They just look the direction they're running. They go, they stand. They might look around once or twice, and then they turn around like instantly, and then they run a different direction. And they do this out in the open all the time. We'll see right here by this bus. There is an AI scav right there. And we knew this is an AI scav area, so that was kind of why I was being a little careful, and because sometimes they can see you from that road up in that spot. But as you can see, he's walking, he's not scanning. His gun is parallel to the ground. I missed my shot right here, and he instantly locates me, which is not something most players will do. Because first of all, it's something most players won't do because it's difficult when you're getting shot at by a suppressed gun, which that one was suppressed. And secondly, most players will like prone, or they'll jump, or they'll dive for cover off of the open area, because this is a place you can go and take cover, that riverbank or that bank of the lake. But no, this AI scav turned directly towards me, ran forwards, as if to come knife me or something with his gun. And you might notice he's not ADS'd. He's not pointing his gun at me. He's just running in my direction. And for proof that I did actually kill him, we hit the second shot. Yeah, that's basically a short but clear example of how AI scavs just do things. Player scavs and PMCs generally work the same or run the same because, you know, they're both players. But we're going to look at an example of that next. So this is the same run, same spot. I had already killed that AI scav. And if you look, the PMC is going to pop up in this little dirt region before he pops up in the scope. AI scavs, as far as I know, don't actually spawn or run off the road on that side. Sometimes they'll run off into like these bushes a little bit, but usually they stick next to that little offshoot road that's nearby. But yeah, you'll see this guy does some weird zigzag stuff. That's not something an AI scav does. He's checking this, he's zigzagging, probably to try and dodge sniper fire from this hill that I'm on, because people camp this hill often. And he's checking for AI scavs over that little bank of dirt. And you'll notice he doesn't ever stop moving. The reason he slowed down was because he was turning around before I even shot, so he could move down to where we're, the Marin car, the big loot spawn under where I'm standing. So, yeah, we missed both shots there, but you can see just how different that is. He's scanning, he didn't look at me right away. He's trying to avoid fire and all that, so. Those, you know, movement is, again, it's something you have to get used to identifying, but between knowing where the AI spawn on the map and being able to tell the difference between player movement and AI movement, you're pretty much good to tell AI from player. But there are some other factors that specifically distinguish PMCs from scavs that we have yet to go over. So this is the PMC from the thumbnail and the first picture, taken from the menu after the escape from Tarkov button on the main menu. I put as much gear as I could on this guy just to show how much more thick your average PMC is, or a geared PMC is, compared to a scav. This is the biggest bag I could find. AI scav, or scavs in general, AI or player scavs don't spawn with these. This is an exfil helmet with night vision. There's a hex grid under there. You can just kind of barely see it right about there. And I've got a large rig on with a well-modded gun and an armband. So the first thing I want to talk about is the armband. PMCs are the only ones who can wear armbands. So if you see someone with an armband and you're a scav, then by all means you're just free and clear to open up on them. If you're playing in a group and you know no one else in your group has an armband, then you can also freely shoot at anybody you see with an armband, which is why I don't run armbands. And I recommend you don't either. Also because this is really bright, and if you're hiding in a bush with a big old bright red armband, then, you know, you're a little easier to spot. So, yeah, generally scavs spawn with smaller bags, usually not bigger than a day pack, although I think this wipe there is an exception with the T20. It is one extra row of slots larger than a day pack or a scav backpack or a Burkit. But other than that, they don't get large bags very often. Usually their armor is not good, and they don't have rigs on, or they have rigs and no armor. You know, there's like a billion different combinations of different pieces of bad gear that scavs can have, whereas players generally won't run those things. So if you can identify good gear from bad gear on a character, then you'll have an easier time figuring out whether or not it's a player or a scav. Another thing I want to talk about is specifically guns. Very few scav guns have any mods at all. And usually the mods they do have are scopes, optics. Not even really good ones. Sometimes they have decent ones, but not often. So if you see someone with a thermal scope, which is what that is, you see someone with a suppressor on a mid-range rifle like an M4 or an AK, then usually that's not a scav gun. You see a drum mag, 90% of the time that's not going to be a scav gun. If you see someone with all of that stuff, then you can pretty much identify that that is not a scav. Yeah, one other point I wanted to mention with PMCs is that their clothing under the armor is usually more the tactical. to describe it. You know, drab green colors, brown colors, washed out camo kind of things. The cargo pants have a slight pattern on them. This dark green matches everything else. Scavs are, you know, meant to be your average person stuck on the war zone, just trying to get by. So they're wearing whatever clothes you would wear in that situation. So this guy's wearing like, well, I don't know if I would ever wear a corduroy jacket, but he's wearing that and like a parka vest under this gear, which he also has an idea rig and a T20, which is one of the largest bags that Scavs spawn with, like I said. But he's also wearing a Momex, a beanie, and really bad headphones, along with press armor. So between all of that, that's really not a great loadout. The one thing that kind of belays what I said about an unmodded gun is this one. I believe this is the one gun that Scavs usually get that's both usually has a sight and a suppressor. But I think there's only one other gun with a suppressor that Scavs can get, and that being the Vepr Hunter. Whatever the semi-auto Vepr is. That one can be suppressed for Scavs, but very rarely is there anything else, if ever. So basically, between you know, just the overall quality of the gear, he's way skinnier. You know, there's no big bag sticking over this guy's back. So you'll be able to tell the difference between this guy and that guy, even at the distances of these shots. These are the dudes we shot in those clips. This is the Scav, and that's the player over there. You can see the Scav, he's got kind of skinny brown pants and, you know, like a blue and white stripy jacket on. You can kind of see it on his arms a little bit. He has no helmet, and he just looks pretty thin compared to this dude over here. Got a big old backpack on, a decent helmet. It's not really huge. It doesn't have a face shield as far as I can tell, but he has a helmet. He has a big bag. And earlier in the clip, there's a couple frames where you can see his gun, and it looks like a decently modded AK. But really, we were at this point we were trying to distinguish them by movement more so than gear. It's just this is what I mean by the difference in general thickness between these two characters, giving away which one's a Scav and which one's a PMC. But I mean, even if that was a thin person, if that person on the right over there, the left, I don't know. Stuff's backwards when I'm trying to talk in front of a screen like this. If this guy looked like this guy, I would still know that that was a player because of how he moved. So these things that we're talking about are, you know, kind of ancillary between identifying what's a Scav and what's a player and what's an AI. But you know, it's nice to know. Good to practice. But yeah, there's one other thing we need to talk about, and that's looting. Again, this doesn't really factor into much of anything at all, but if you're looting a person and you're curious to know if they're a Scav or a PMC, then you can look at two things. One, the melee weapon. You cannot loot a PMC's melee weapon. It's grayed out, there's nothing you can do to take it. Unless it's a cultist knife. That one can always be looted for whatever reason. The other thing is dog tags. Even if PMCs have had their dog tags looted, they still have the spot and the spot for the compass. AI Scavs, or Scavs in general, have neither, be they AI or player. And you can also take any Scav weapon, as you can see right there. There's one other important thing I forgot to mention. As much as an armband is a dead giveaway for a PMC, there is a dead giveaway for AI Scavs. Not so much for player Scavs or PMCs, but if you run into or aggro an AI Scav in any way, then they will yell at you in Russian. That Scav that I shot earlier in the clip, when he got shot at the first time, I guarantee you he yelled probably a whole slew of stuff, but I was too far away to hear it. But if you're going into a close quarters area and you round a corner and you hear a bunch of yelling in Russian, then you know that that's a AI Scav, which is a good sign that no PMCs have been around, because AI Scavs will aggro onto PMCs, you know, automatically, just like they did to you when they yelled at you the first time, you know? So, you know, that's just one extra thing to tell which is which. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So first things first, I would recommend learning the maps and where the AI spawns. And as you run through them, take note of where you run into the AI spawns, and just try and build up that memory of, okay, I know if I go in here, there's a risk of AI scavs, so you're looking for them, and you're ready for them when you do find them, and that way you know when you're going places where you never see them, to be careful for players in case you do run into them. Because there's no risk of running into AIs. After that, it's important to learn and distinguish between player movement and AI movement. Like I said, AI movement tends to be very straight lines, kind of jolty. They don't scan properly like a player would. They don't take cover unless they're fighting. Sometimes they take cover when they're fighting. Other times they just run around in the open and charge the person who's shooting at them, So start to pick out that kind of behavior, and that'll kind of help you identify a little more quickly the more you do it, just what you're fighting against. And then after that, there are those visible differences, which more so than distinguishing between player and AI, they help you distinguish between Scav and PMC. So if you see really skinny characters running around, then chances are it's a Scav. Bad gear, shiny rigs, no rigs, bad armor, no armor, bad rigs, small bags, that kind of thing. Then chances are, you're fighting a Scav, so you don't have to worry about them having the craziest ammo or anything, but you do have to worry about whether or not it's a player or an AI. Because if it's a player, they're going to do, tactical things to try and take your gear from you. And they'll probably be more aggressive in addition. But, yeah, and then you also know whether or not it's PMC. If it's really thick, big bag, usually suppressed gun, 9 times out of 10 is a PMC. Because very few scav guns spawn suppressed. So it's just things like that, and taking the time to practice and note these things and remember them. And yeah, the more you do it, the easier it gets. And I hope this video helped. But that's all I got, really. So I hope you enjoyed. Like I said, I hope it helped. And I hope you have a good rest of your wipe. YEET.